recorded.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Have attention, please. All quiet, please. Thank you. Go ahead and take out your notes. We're going to be continuing looking at the United States presidency, how we get to have a president, some of the responsibilities of the president, various different components of Article 2, Section 1, Presidential Basics is what I call it. Okay? Careful.
Don't mess up Jordan.
You made me kill Jordan.
Oh.
Oh.
Up. No. No. Not okay. Okay? Have your notes out. Catch up. We're going to have a quiz, obviously, when we get into the beginning part of class next week. Next time on Friday. Yes? Chapter 3, Sections 3 and 4. 10 questions, true, false. Come in prepared. Okay? Also, just by way of information, in case you haven't heard discussions and so forth in other classes, actually, has anyone discussed in any classes? Raise your hand if anyone, if you've heard any discussion in any of your other classes with respect to how things might change here at North Star after spring break.
Yeah, we go back
You
to
did.
that normal.
What'd you hear?
That there's been many go back to normal.
I think it's going to be pretty highly likely that we will go back to a semi-normal, and here's what normal is. We'll still have the Mondays, doing what we do on the Mondays, because there's still a number of students who are at home, who are doing the courses and so forth at home, and so that's probably going to remain the same. But as far as the other classes, the other days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, we'll go bring everybody back in. Math, obviously it's going to be impossible to do social distancing in a classroom setting, but math will be continued. And I did ask this because I was interested, so instead of like today, where you have like homework in every class, go to a block schedule. So anticipating like on an A day you go to like whatever periods 1 through 4, and then on the B day 5 through 8, which actually works out better in the sense that you would have presumably then a longer lunch period because you didn't have all this break time that eats up, parts of the day. You understand? So I would see you guys then, I guess whatever, I don't know when we have lunch under a normal schedule. That's usually have it early, isn't it? Like wasn't it right after second period under like block day?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I would see you guys like right after lunch on a B day. Okay, so like on Wednesdays and Fridays, kind of like what we're doing right now. Okay, does that make sense? That's kind of what it looks like it's going to be going down at North Star. Questions? Okay, cool. All right. So let us proceed with this. We're in the midst of our government, talking about the presidency. And I believe we figured out our crazy system of getting a president. So Xander, how does somebody elected to be president of the United States of America?
We elect representatives and then
Electors.
Yes, then they elect the president and vice versa.
Good. If there are 538 electors, what is the minimum number of electors in order to be elected president or vice president?
How many votes?
538. It sounds a little vague. I think we need a specific number. Do you have a specific number? 270. So if one candidate gets 270 out of 538, how many does the next candidate get? If there's only 2 candidates getting electoral votes. If out of 538, this is math. Everyone's like, math. It's basic subtraction or addition. There's 538. One candidate gets 270. How many does the other candidate get? 258. Okay? And then that candidate would lose. Okay? So you have to have a majority. That's where the 270 comes in. So yeah, like here, this is kind of a weird election. I showed this to you guys. I remember last time, 1992. This was the last time we actually had like a non-Republican or Democrat get a big chunk of votes. His name was Ross Perot, the guy here in the middle. He was actually doing pretty well that year. He was invited to like the big debate between the Democratic contender, you recognize him, Bill Clinton, and the Republican contender, actually he was the president at the time, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush's dad. And Ross Perot was invited to the debate, and he ended up getting almost 19% of the vote. But when you look at the map to see which states he won, how many states did Ross Perot win? None. He came in first in none of them. Who came in first? 370 electoral votes Clinton got, and then the remainder, 168, went to Bush. Even though, look at this, there's a popular vote. So they only had like just about 43% of the popular vote. So he came in first in a big chunk of states, so he won. We did talk about what happens if you got a third-party candidate, because Perot was like, man, all my voters, if they just stuck with me, I would have won, right? So Perot had results with Perot voters that stayed home because of media, well, anyway, whatever. But I mean, if he had actually done pretty well and actually done well enough to win a bunch of states, what's the answer to this question? I'm going to double check and see if I actually covered it with you. If no candidate gets a majority of the electoral vote,
They have to go to the House and then they vote.
good, is that what you guys had written down last time? Okay. That's what I call the so-called Plan B. When was the last time we actually didn't have a majority in the electoral college, the electoral vote, and we had to go to the House of Representatives?
Forever ago.
Yeah. President number 6, John Quincy Adams, in 1824. So most of the time this works, and the reason it works is because this country is very much a two-party country. And ever since the time of like Abraham Lincoln, it's been Republican, Democrat.
So if we go back, on the slide that we were just on, the pie chart, yeah, what is the 7%? On the far right?
I think whoever was making this chart was saying, the media was, and actually the Republicans and Democrats were saying this. They're like, hey, bro voters, don't waste your vote. Make sure you vote for one of the two Republican or Democrat candidates. And so, because there was a time, I remember there was a bunch of people who were like, I'm going to vote for Pro, I'm going to vote for Pro. They were fed up with the Republican and Democrats. Who knows if that'll happen in your lifetime? And as we go later on in the last year we get to, we'll talk about how sometimes parties will split. The Republican Party is potentially going to split. I don't know. I mean, you guys would be kind of stupid. But if they split to like a Trump part and a not Trump part, who's probably going to win an election if you got a Trump candidate and a not Trump candidate and then a Democratic candidate when he's the president? Probably the Democratic candidate. It happened. You look right here. Look at President 28. Woodrow Wilson. When he ran the first time, he was running against the Republican president, William Howard Taft, 27, and the previous Republican president, Theodore Roosevelt, number 26, who wasn't happy with Taft, and he ran again, and then Roosevelt didn't get the Republican nomination, and he ran as a bull moose progressive. So there were three major candidates on the ballot that year. Who ended up winning? When the Republican Party split itself, the Democrats. So what did the Republican Party do after that? They're like, let's go back together. So there's a real incentive to try and keep your people in the tent, even though sometimes you're really, really angry with it. And that happens among Republicans, and it happens among Democrats. But one of the things that keeps them ultimately in the tent together, they like to win elections. And hello, politics. Okay? All right. So, let's continue on. 23rd Amendment. Did we get that? Did we get it? What's 23rd Amendment? I'm trying to see if we got that. I'm not sure. Did we get it? You might not have. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. This is where we left off. The 23rd Amendment. So this is new for your notes here. The 23rd Amendment. Did you get it?
I think I know.
You think you know, okay. And I kind of referenced it perhaps earlier
Yes.
when I was talking about the District of Columbia. If you live in Washington, D.C., what state do you live in? You don't? Yeah, you don't live in a state. Are you a United States citizen if you're born in Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it a territory?
No.
Well, no. It's sort of like a special territory, but it's not like, like Idaho was once a territory that eventually became a state, and Alaska and Hawaii eventually became states, although there's a few territories out there that You're Puerto Rico, like, come on, where are you gonna be your state? You know, make up your mind. If you live in a territory, if you live in DC, do you get to vote for people who are gonna be serving in Congress? How many senators do you get?
No.
0. How many voting representatives in the House do you get? 0. I think they've got one representative that shows up and talks and observes and so forth, but so what? How many votes do you get in the presidential race? 0 until, write it down, the 23rd Amendment. Okay? That's nice. Now, if you get for the 23rd Amendment, and that is ratified, so that's been in there since 1961. Okay, so that's cool. So if you live in Washington, D.C., you got to participate in the presidential election. And the number of electoral votes that D.C. gets is as though it were a state. So it's a small state. It's never had any more than 3. And that's the minimum number of electoral votes you can have. Wyoming, Delaware, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, they have 3. Alaska, 3. Idaho's got 4. We got more population than Washington, D.C. Okay, question? Stop me out.
That's fine.
Okay, good, all right. Has Washington, D.C. ever cast its electoral votes for a Republican candidate for president?
No.
Never. Okay? That should surprise you. Cities tend to be more Democratic. Rural areas, towns, and so forth tend to be more Republican. Washington, D.C. is, by definition, a city. Okay? All right, next thing. Let's see. Oh, qualifications. Here we go. Qualifications to run for president and vice president. You ready? First one is an age qualification. Let's go right there. How old do you have to be elected president or serve as president or vice president? 35. What was it for the House? 25. What was it for the Senate?
What?
Think of numbers in 5 increments.
30.
30 is right. So we got 25 for the House, 30 for the Senate, 35 for the president and vice president. When we get to the Supreme Court, you're like, well, how old do you have to be to get appointed to the Supreme Court? There's no age requirement there. You're probably not going to be appointed to the Supreme Court as a 23-year-old. Good luck. Yeah. All right. Yes.
Is a natural born citizen?
We'll get to that. Just hang on just a sec.
Is there unnatural born citizen?
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a weird thing. I'm going to try and define what it is. It's not natural birth. That's totally different, okay? I'm talking about the delivery method, but it has to do with, like, anyway, hold on to that. Here's another qualification. The president and vice president, write this down, the president and vice president have to be residents of different states.
Why?
Because it's in the Constitution. I guess in the early days, they're like, I don't know, we'll probably end up with too many people from Virginia. Because if you look at the early presidents, like number 1, Washington, Virginia, Adams, Massachusetts, Jefferson, Virginia, Madison, Virginia, James Monroe, Virginia, Douglas Adams, Massachusetts. And then I think we got a couple more Virginians, and it hasn't been too many Virginians. But that was the biggest state back then, and so they just like spread it out. Question, Mary, you got a question? This is, somebody asked this in the other class. You have to meet that qualification by inauguration day. So the election is in November. You guys remember the election is in November. And we'll get to it in a moment. Some of you guys sort of know because it happened not too long ago. What's the date you take the oath of office, the inauguration? January 20th. So you need to be at least 35 on January 20th. Having said that, have we ever had a 35-year-old president? Have we ever had a 40-year-old president?
Close.
Nope. Youngest we've ever had, I want to say Theodore Roosevelt, 26, he was vice president, and then when McKinley was shot, I think he was like 41 when he ascended in and became the president. I think the youngest person we've ever elected is John F. Kennedy, number 35. I want to say he was like 42, but never any younger. And we tend to sort of go for the older ones. The last 2 presidents we've had have been among the oldest presidents that we've ever had in our country's history. Okay? George W. Bush, number 43, from Texas. Texas, where the power's on, except when it's not, during really terrible, like, winter storms. His vice president was Dick Cheney. Although there was an interesting challenge, because Dick Cheney, as his vice president, when they announced that, everyone was like, well, where's Dick Cheney from? Living in Texas. He's registered to vote in Texas. That's 2 Texans. That's a violation of the Constitution. What are you going to do? He actually reestablished his residence back in Wyoming. He had property there. He had served in Congress in Wyoming. You can write this down. It's not that hard to get your residency changed. Honestly, it's not that hard. If you want to, how many of you guys are thinking of going to college maybe outside of the state of Idaho? There you go. When you go to that other state, get a driver's license from that state, easy peasy. Register to vote in that state, easy peasy. You want to pay in-state tuition, which is much lower than out-of-state tuition, not so easy peasy. Right? You might have to establish independence and ask Mr. Pettit, because he'll be able to give you some tips on that. Is there a big difference between in-state and out-of-state tuition? Oh, it's crazy. I mean, the typical thing out in it would you say like a $10,000 difference?
Or way more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's. Sometimes you look at, like my daughter's looking at grad school, it's like she's looking at going, you know, in one of the northwestern states, and some of them have relationships with Idaho. So if you go to that state, you pay as though you were from Idaho, but some of them don't. I don't think California has that kind of relationship with Idaho at all. So if you want to go to California, you're either going to pay out-of-state tuition or, I don't know, live with your grandma for a year as an independent person, and then you can pay in-state lower tuition.
So, like, what classifies them as like a resident of that state?
It's really easy to get residency. You just live there. Most states, it's like you just like within a month or so. I mean, some states they require you to switch over your driver's license within a certain period of time.
So
Typically, like if you're a young person, you can choose to vote. That's another like measure of residency. You can continue voting in Idaho where your parents live, or you can switch it over to where you're going to college. It's really easy to do that.
you go to the DMV.
Yeah. Yeah, you go to their, and hopefully there's not a massive one in there when you're there. Okay? All right, so that's not a big limitation. The one that's kind of weird is this natural born thing. First, write this down. You have to have been in the United States for at least 14 years. Well, that's not going to be too hard if you have to be at least 35 to begin with. So that's not going to be too big of a hurdle. The other part is an interesting kind of a twisty sort of thing. Natural born citizen. So you got to be a citizen of the United States. So is that it? No. My mom is a citizen of the United States. She was, not to confuse you, she was naturalized. I don't know if you didn't have to do the test way back in the day. Nowadays you would have to take the test. Yeah. Naturalized means you were born in another country, you were a citizen of another country, you came to the United States of America. How many of you guys know people, you don't know my mom, how many of you guys know people that are naturalized U.S. citizens? Okay. So, no big deal. Are they equal to every other United States citizen in every respect? Except for one. They may not serve as president or vice president of the United States. Whoa! Like, why was that put in there? Why did they limit it to you have to be, literally, natural born means born in the United States, as opposed to not born in the United States? What, are we afraid if somebody gets their citizenship later on in life or something? They're a plant from some other country. You can't trust them. Don't vote for that person. They were born in another country. I don't know. It's still in the Constitution. It hasn't been changed. What would it take for it to be changed? What would it take for it to be changed? An amendment to the Constitution that requires what vote by the House and Senate? 2/3 of each. And then what vote from the state? Three-fourths. Is it very easy to do that? How many times has that happened in our country's history? Exactly.
I have a question, can you be a U.S. citizen living in another country?
Let me bring that up.
Okay.
So if you were born, let's say your parents are both U.S. citizens, and they're working in Germany, right, either in the military or for business or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of American families that are working in other parts of the world, and they have kids, and they're born there. Are you a U.S. citizen if your parents are U.S. citizens? Yes. Yes. You are, okay? And you might qualify for dual citizenship in that country too, but that's beside the point. You are a U.S. But here's the kicker: are you natural born?
No.
No. You can't run for president. It's weird. What if you're born in the territory? Is that considered natural born? Most legal scholars are like, yeah, that'll probably work out okay. I think we've actually had a president that was born in the territory that later became a state. We've got a poster here for John McCain. He was a Republican candidate for president in 2008 against Barack Obama when he first ran. John McCain was born in the territory of the Panama Canal Zone, which we had at the time. His dad was an admiral in the Navy, and they were stationed in the Panama Canal Zone territory, and little John McCain was born there. And most analysts seem to say that if you're born in the territory, that's cool. That would qualify as natural born.
I'm not sure if territories are also like military bases on other places.
That's the tricky thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're, because military bases aren't really U.S. Soil. An embassy would be considered U.S. soil, but you don't get birth to babies in U.S. embassies. If your parents are located in a U.S. military thing, you probably could have been born. I mean, there's a number of Americans who were born in military-based hospitals. That's pretty typical, hopefully, but it's still like part of that country. It's messy, and it's just kind of like, I mean, I keep my mouth shut on so many different things and so forth, but this is one I look at and go, really, seriously, do we need to have that? But is there a big impetus to try and get that amended? I don't think so. I mean, if all of a sudden the Republicans are like, we have to get this person as president, and the only thing that is preventing us is this constitutional prohibition. Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know him?
Yeah.
Right? Born in what country? He was born in Austria, yes, and he got into politics in California. He was elected as the governor of California. And for a while, yeah, I mean, he was pretty popular and so forth, but could he ever run for president? No, unless they change the Constitution, and if it's a Republican that could benefit from the change of the Constitution, who's probably going to be against that? Democrat. Conversely, if it's a Democrat, that a lot of Democrats are like, oh, we could really, get this person to be awesome. They were born in Canada or, born in base housing somewhere. I just don't see this happening. I don't know. It's just there. Know it. It's weird. It was for the Constitution. It's really hard to change the Constitution. So what we end up doing is looking around. Can we feudal it and wheedle it and so forth and get around it? Don't worry this. Hey, what about this one? You know this one? Because not every country follows this. If your parents, neither of them are a U.S. citizen, and you're born in the United States of America, what are you? You are a U.S. citizen. Natural born. What are they? They are undocumented people in this country, also referred to as illegal immigrants. They are immigrants, but they're illegal. Are they entitled to stay in the country? No. Does the United States government want to separate your parents and send them back to where they came from and let you stay in the country? Probably not. Yeah, that seems kind of rough. So, yeah, that seems kind of rough. And, yeah, so we got all these interesting immigration things going on out there, and then we still got this, like, who can run for president of the United States of America. All right, you guys pretty clear on that amendment? Okay, or at least that component. Now the 25th Amendment. This has got some interesting things going on. You ready? 25th Amendment. It's like about flippin' time. The 25th Amendment, 1967. Here we go. There's two big parts to it. I'll deal with the part that's not that controversial. You ready? Vice presidential vacancy. 25th Amendment, vice presidential vacancy. In fact, even before the 25th Amendment, I should say this, because I always forget this part because it's pretty obvious. If a president dies, who takes over? Thank you very much. Very good. Take a look at the board, see if anyone can get this one. When was the last president that died in office and his vice president took over? You see that, Danielle? He wasn't sick. Kennedy, yeah, number 35. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas by an assassin. His vice president, Lyndon Johnson, took over. He was also from Texas. So, this 25th Amendment actually took place after John F. Kennedy. Now, up until that time, we never had a president resign. Write this down. Who takes over if the president quits, resigns? Vice president. There we go. When was the last time when was the only time we had a president resign? Very good. Nixon, president number 37 in 1974. He resigned. Who became his vice president? Or excuse me, who became the president? Gerald R. Ford. He finished out the remainder of Nixon's term, ran for his own, didn't get elected. Okay? Now, yes. You guys are, students are always in the, what happens is, it's the president and the vice president and the speaker of the house, and because we haven't gotten to the line of succession yet, and some of you guys, I don't know what that, the designated survivor. There's old TV series and so forth on that. If there's enough time, because we're going to get to that here in a moment, if the president resigns and then the vice president takes over, there will be time now under the 25th Amendment, I'm about to explain that, for that new president or the vice president to pick a new vice president. You ready? Yeah? Because here's the deal. Before the 25th Amendment, we've had a number of times, like Lincoln was shot and killed early in his second term. His vice president, Andrew Johnson, took over the remainder of the term. Well, who was Andrew Johnson's vice president? No one. Who's Lyndon Johnson's vice president for the remainder of the Kennedy term? No one. We only got one spare when we elected a president and a vice president. If we use this, it's kind of like if you're driving a car and your tire blows out, what do you put to replace that tire? A spare. And then what do?
Keep driving.
Fix the tire and put the spare back. You look like an idiot if you're driving around continually on a spare tire, right? Plus, you're just asking for, you're like, oh, I'm good now. I got my spare on my car. Well, guess what? One of your other tires could blow, and maybe that's spare one. It helps. The 25th Amendment replaces the spare. Here's one part of the 25th Amendment. You ready? Here's how it works. If there's a vacancy in the vice presidency, because the vice president has now become president, or maybe the vice president quits or dies. If there's a vacancy in the vice presidency, it can be filled. This is an easy part. You ready? Who do you suppose gets to fill the vacancy? Gets to choose who the new vice president is going to be. Write it down, the president. Okay? But it's not just the president. There's going to be like a confirmation process. So the president gets to pick the new vice president, and it needs to be confirmed in, anybody think they know where it's going to be confirmed? And, very good, by what percentage of votes? No. Yep. Simple majority. That's not too bad, yeah.
So, why does the president and the vice president die? Like they're on the same time?
Simultaneously?
Like they say they're in both the same car and they just got a car crash and died.
Well, maybe they shouldn't be in the same car. That's just not safe for the
What would
country.
happen at that point?
What would happen? They would speak of the house, yeah. And actually, the next part doesn't make sense. You're jumping ahead, but it's okay. You're like, when we get to the succession part and so forth, I already remember this because we covered it. The president and the vice president, they both like, there's a TV series called Visiting New Survivor, and I watched, several episodes and so forth. And it basically has envisions like the entire Capitol building blowing up with the president, the vice president, the next in succession, which is the Speaker of the House, and the next in succession, which really doesn't make sense. It's the senior member of the majority party in the Senate, which is always going to be a very old person. Right now, it's Patrick Leahy from Vermont, and he was a senator when I was a page in the United States Senate back in 1979. He's an old guy. He was the one that was officiating that Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate. I want to say he's like, what's that? Oh, yeah, as far as impeachment trials, yeah, lucky him. But yeah, and then the next one, the next people in line of succession, is all the different cabinet members, like Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of which is why whenever they have some big event, where like the president's giving a speech and the vice president's there, and a lot of members of Congress and so forth, they always take one of the cabinet members and have them not be in the same place, in case something really bad happens. So what happens is, the guy hears about it, has a heart attack, falls over, and then everyone's dead. I don't know. No, it's good. I don't know who's the next president. It's not in the Constitution. Question, comment? No? Okay. All right, so President picks the replacement vice president, approved by the House and Senate, simple majority. Has that ever happened? Yes. Take a look, number 37. Richard Nixon actually, so like, this was literally within 10 years of the 25th Amendment coming into our Constitution. Richard Nixon's vice president was a guy by the name of Spiro Agnew. He was from Maryland. He was a former governor. Turns out he was pretty corrupt. And we found out about it and put a lot of pressure, and so he quit. He quit. I want to say like in 1973. So Nixon's like, wow, I don't have a vice president. What should I do? Really easy. Look, raise your hand if you can tell me. What was the name of the man that Richard Nixon picked to be his new vice president? Gerald R. Ford, exactly. He was a member of the House of Representatives. He was a top-ranking Republican. My dad, who was a Republican in the House of Representatives, they worked along with each other, along real well. From Michigan, former football player, University of Michigan. He was appointed vice president. So there he is, vice president. And that, why is he up there? Did he get elected as president? Nixon resigned. And so Ford became president. And then what do you suppose Ford had to do? Exactly, find a replacement. He chose a guy from New York named Nelson Rockefeller, from a very wealthy New York family. The Rockefellers, you remember the Rockefellers?
So there were 3 vice presidents and 1 president?
Yes. And then when Ford ran for president in his own right, he didn't get elected. So he's the only person who ever served as president who's never been elected as president or vice president. He was appointed as vice president. Okay? Have we had anybody since then? Nope. All right, so that's the 25th Amendment, the first part. Here's the next part. And this is a little bit more controversial, but I'm glad they have it in there. You ready? This part has to do with what happens if the president has a disability and can't do the job. Look at President number 28, Woodrow Wilson. For, I want to say about 7 months, he was like almost completely incapacitated. He had a stroke, right? Lack of oxygen to the brain. And he wasn't in a coma, but he was not able to go out and do much of anything. He was hanging out in the White House. His wife was there. His close staff was there. And the vice president was like, what? I'm glad we did that, because I mean, Kennedy could have been shot and in a coma. And if Kennedy was shot and in a coma, who would be the president? Kennedy. This is before the 25th Amendment. After the 25th Amendment, write this down. Ready? Write this down. After the 25th Amendment, here's what can happen if a president has a disability. The vice president takes over as, get this, acting president. Acting president has all of the powers as president. And if you're wondering, does that count for like the 10-year limit and so forth? I don't think so. They're acting president. So long as the president is disabled, right? And if the president's not disabled anymore, then the president gets to be, like, have all the powers of presidency. Now let me fill it out a little bit here. First, key person. There's 2 component parts there. Who determines whether or not the president has a disability? The first person is going to be the most important one. Guess who has to agree that the president has a disability, and therefore the vice president will take over as acting president? The vice president. Very good. Write that down. The vice president has to be in agreement with it. If the vice president is not in agreement with it, it doesn't happen. Okay? Well, who else needs to be in agreement with it? Jump ahead here because I got a slide that helps us. Yeah, here we go. A majority of the cabinet also needs to agree. So who's the cabinet? This is Trump's cabinet when he was president, at least at one point. Some of them came and went and so forth. It was like the heads of all of the top departments, State Department, Treasury Department, Justice Department, and so forth. Together, you can see, I don't know, just about a dozen or so. If a majority of them agree, along with the vice president, 25th Amendment is invoked. The vice president has the power of acting president. Okay, you got that? Has that ever happened? Not involuntarily. I want to say George H.W. Bush, he went in for some surgery. He knew he was going to be, like, incapacitated. And so, like, if a country was going to launch a nuclear attack at us, he wanted to have his vice president ready to go. So he signed a document basically for whatever time that he was out. The vice president was the acting president. Does that make sense? And then he came back into it. The only time we've ever come close, there was some discussion last month. There were some people who are like, Donald Trump is dangerous, and we need to invoke the 25th Amendment to declare that he is a danger to his country because of some disability, and so forth. And that discussion got ground to a halt pretty quick, because which person in that thing said, no, I'm not going to go there? Mike Pence, the vice president. He's like, I'm not going to go along with that one. So, I mean, that ended it right there.
I was just gonna ask, like, so if the president says like, so the president he doesn't have to say yes to that?
Now, this is an interesting question. You're asking what the president thinks. If the president is in a position where they can encourage the vice president to invoke the 25th, and the rest of the cabinet can invoke the 25th, it's going to happen if the president wants it. But most of what we're looking at is like an involuntary thing, where the president is like in a coma, or the president is completely off the deep end. You know what I'm talking about? That's where the Constitution allows for people to step in. And those people are vice president and majority of the cabinet.
So could they take control though,
Yes.
using the 25,
Yes.
even if he didn't want
Yes.
lose control?
Yes. That was why it was interesting, because I think Mike Pence was sort of looking at the situation going, well, January 6th aside, things have calmed down a bit. Between January 6th was not a good day. Remember January 6th? What happened on January 6th? The Capitol was overwhelmed by like all kinds of protesters and so forth. It was not good. But there was no repeat of that, thankfully, all the way up until Inauguration Day, and then Joe Biden became president, and then it's no longer an issue. But there was some discussion about that. There were folks that were going, let's do the 25th. It's there, let's bring it out. It wasn't brought out. Because Vice President Pence was like, I think we're going to be okay, and I'm not going to do this. Okay? Does that make sense? There was a movie, Air Force One. Harrison Ford played the president. This actually came up in the context of this movie.
Oh, I remember.
Harrison Ford was on Air Force One, right? Okay? And there was a bad guy. I think it was played by Gary Oldman, right? Who, Sirius Black in the Harry Potter series. No? Okay, anyway. So he was a terrorist. And he got on the plane with the president, and the president's wife, and the president's daughter. He was shooting up people. It was terrible. Took over the plane. And the vice president in Washington, D.C., and the cabinet were like, should we invoke the 25th? Because the terrorist bad guys were trying to put pressure on the president to release terrorists that were being held in federal prison. And there was a fear that the president was going to order the release of those bad guy terrorists and so forth. So they're like, let's invoke the 25th Amendment. Let's take the power away from that president up stuck in that plane with those terrorists all over the place. Let's do that so that he can't release those prisoners. And the vice president steps in and goes, no, I'm not going to do it. I trust that our president will get the job done. It's a movie. What did Harrison Ford do to the bad terrorist guys on the airplane? Boom! Exactly. Actually, one of them ended up like free falling from the plane. Yeah. I mean, hello, it's a Harrison Ford movie. He's the president. Yeah, he solved it. But that was where the 25th Amendment issue came up. Okay? All right? Lame duck president. The 20th Amendment is going to make it so that the lame duck president isn't going to be as lame for as long. I'm like, what are you talking about? A lame duck president is like, I'm the president, but I've only got a little bit more time as president. Either because you're at the end of your second term, or like with Donald Trump, he was defeated in November, and then when did he have to hand over power? January 20th. So who is president? All of November, and December, and most of January. And they have the power of the presidency. So it's kind of interesting. So people are like, well, can we shorten that? Here's the deal, write this down. The 20th Amendment, which was ratified in, 1933? We used to have presidents inaugurated, take the oath of office in March. And we've always had presidential elections in November. Are we waiting until March to give him the job? I'm like, does that make any sense? Well, a long time ago it made some sense because, roads and weren't very good back in those days. But nowadays it doesn't make as much sense. Like, how much time do we need to get the electoral college, to get their job done and so forth? Oh, a couple of months? Okay, well good. Write it down. The 20th Amendment, officially, is one of the easiest ones to remember. It says, President, Vice President, will be inaugurated, oath of office, January 20th. That's it. Okay? So sometimes it's referred to as the lame duck amendment because it moves it up a little bit. It moves it up by about a month and a half compared to what it used to be. Because otherwise, if we didn't have that, who would be president right now? Trump would be until when? Sometime in March. Yeah. Okay. The first one that applied to was Franklin D. Roosevelt, number 32, and that kicked in, after, I think it into his second term.
Didn't he get stuck in his head?
What's that?
Didn't he get stuck in his head?
No.
Or was that someone else?
Number 27.
Yep.
Yeah. He was the president with the most girth. Yes. Number 27. And he hated being president because the previous president, like pretty soon after, they were BFF. Roosevelt was like, yeah, Taft, you'll be a great president. And then Taft goes into the job and Roosevelt's like, you suck. And Taft's like, I hate this job. And he ate a lot and really made his life miserable. And then Roosevelt ran against him. And Howard Taft couldn't beat Roosevelt. And the Democrat won. And then Taft was like, oh my God, I hate that job. I'm so glad to be out of it. He got appointed to the Supreme Court and was happy to plan. Lost weight, didn't get stuck in tubs anymore. And yeah, so way to go, Taft. All right. Next, compensation. Is the president going to get paid? Heck yeah. It's like about $400,000. Yeah, it's about $400,000. No big whoop. You're like, wow, that's pretty good money. Donald Trump, on a good year, is he going to make more than $400,000? Yeah, was he doing the job for the money? No, in fact, some of them, after being president, can make $400,000 in speaking fees and selling books and yada, 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 yada. So $400,000 is a start for a president. But put this down. There are other benefits that have a really big dollar value to them. Are you ready? Health insurance, right? You're going to get great health care. When Donald Trump got sick with COVID, did he get pretty good health care? Yeah, he got the best. They were going to bring out all this stuff to make sure that he was going to return to good health. Okay, so you got the health thing going on there. Retirement pension, write that down. A retirement pension. You're going to get money from the government for many, many, many years, all the way until you die. Pretty good money. And a security detail. Who provides the security detail for former presidents and their wives? Secret Service protection. Write that down. So Donald Trump down in Florida. Barack Obama, where is he living now?
He's in,
I want to say Illinois, no? Or is he like in the Northwest? George W. Bush hangs out in Texas. Bill Clinton, I don't know if he actually hangs out in New York, probably. Anyway, they have Secret Service protection there, paid for by the taxpayers. Question?
Can the president ask for a raise?
Good question. Who do you suppose would be responsible for determining what the raise would be? Congress, yeah. Yeah, Congress can give themselves raises, and they're the ones that give the president raises or not.
So couldn't they just who could stop them from giving themselves a huge...
We've already covered that. Yeah, the 27th Amendment actually says that if Congress gives themselves a raise, when are they actually going to get the raise?
After they resign?
After the next election. They're like, I forgot that one. Well, it's kind of forgettable, but you need to remember what the 27th Amendment says. Oh, for Obama? Yeah, that makes sense. And you kind of stay close to what's going on. They get a house. 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. They stay in the house. Third floor is the residential area. And where do they work? On the ground floor, they actually built a west wing, which has an Oval Office and all kinds of stuff and so forth there. They got that. They got transportation. Oh, and they got like a vacation home in Maryland, Camp David. They got a vacation home, and sometimes they're like, oh, I'm gonna bring the Israeli and the Egyptian leader together, and maybe they'll come up with peace. They can't take it forward. So they got a house, vacation house, and they got a plane. Air Force One takes them all over the place. It's a really good airplane, and it's fully equipped with everything you need, all the secret details and so forth, security. And they got a helicopter right down, Marine One. It takes them from the White House lawn out to the airport, where they get on the plane. I wouldn't be surprised. There's a lot of good places to go to. That's the great thing.
What's the most expensive thing on the plane, like a multi-million-dollar refrigerator?
Could be. I've been on one of the Air Force Ones that's been decommissioned at Ronald Reagan's Presidential Museum and Library in California. It's really cool. It's big. I mean, it's a 747. It's a Boeing 747. Well, it's one of the planes that like would fly if you really like across the ocean with like, 700 passengers. It's a big plane. Oh, no, you'd like it. You would